Oral questions. Questions orales. Honorable Leader of the Opposition, Pierre Poilievre.
The protests, the violent protests in Montreal are the consequence of a prime minister who, for 9 years, has promoted woke, toxic, divisive identity politics.
You got a voice actor as a translator now? What the heck?
Race, sex, vaccination status, etc. And along with dividing Canadians, he's erasing our history. He's allowing terrorists and criminals to come into our country. What's the result? 251 more hate crimes. When will he allow us to have an election so that we can fix what he has broken? The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, and let me be very clear. What was on
Shut the hell up, old man.
This past weekend was criminality. The violence, the hatred, and the anti-Semitism that took place in Montreal is completely unacceptable, and everyone in this House must condemn it in the strongest possible terms.
The lawless hate riot that we saw on the streets of Montreal is what happens after 9 years of a woke prime minister pushing radical woke identity politics, dividing people by race, gender, vaccine status, religion, and more. On top of dividing, he erases our heroes and history, saying Canada has no core identity. He opened the borders to terrorists and lawbreakers. The results? Assassinations on Canadian soil, firebombings and terrorist attacks against places of worship, 251% more hate crime. It wasn't like this before this Prime Minister and won't be after he's gone. Why not an election so we can fix what he broke?
Yes, sirree.
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Look at this maple Joe Biden.
I believe that it is shameful that anyone would speak of the violence that took place on our streets here in Canada in political terms for purely partisan political intention.
It was political, dumbass.
Mr. Speaker, I believe
what an idiot.
It's all of our responsibility to stand up to such hatred and to condemn it in the strongest possible terms, unequivocally, and on behalf of all decent Canadians.
What a freaking idiot! It is political. They're political protests.
I've never found this.
After 9 years of this Prime Minister, he's doubled the cost of housing and increased the cost of food 37% more quickly in Canada than in the United States. And now he's trying to hide that. He's saying that, you might save 10 cents on a bag of chips, or you might be able to save on Halloween costumes after Halloween's already over, Mr. Speaker. So what has the Bloc got for keeping this Prime Minister in power? Nothing. Nothing for seniors. The leader of the Bloc Québécois, he speaks a big game, but he doesn't play a big game. Why not a carbon tax election so we can get rid of taxes and help people save real money? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, today we can really wonder who talks a lot and who does a lot, because today every member of this House has the right, the obligation to help Canadians, Quebecers, with a bit of help. So my question is, will the Conservative members have the right to vote for their constituents? The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
After doubling housing costs and inflating food prices 37% faster in Canada than in the United States, with inflationary carbon taxes and deficit spending, the Prime Minister now has a tiny 2-month tax trick that will save you 10 cents on a pack of chips, save you a few pennies on a Christmas tree, but only after your Christmas tree is already up and decorated.
Yeah.
You'll even save on Halloween costumes 2 months after Halloween. Does he really expect Canadians to fall for this tiny tax trick just before he quadruples the carbon tax on heat, homes, gas, and groceries?
Tiny hands tax trick.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm really glad the Leader of the Opposition started by comparing our economic position with the U.S. Because the fact is, in Canada, inflation is lower. In Canada, interest rates are lower. In Canada, deficits are lower. And in Canada, the public debt is lower. Let's stop talking.
What is wrong with her face?
When it comes to supporting Canadians, what I want to know is, will Conservative MPs be allowed to offer a tax break to their constituents? I know their constituents want it. That's what we're hearing from everyone.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this from a minister who, after finding out that the economy is entering its 6th consecutive quarter of shrinking per capita GDP, that's income per person down, while the American income per person is up. After she learned that there are 2 million people lined up at food banks, 38% more chronic homelessness, 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario after 9 years of this government. She says we're not in a recession. We're in a vibe session, she says. So what's her message to people who are hungry and homeless after 9 years of her government? They just need to get with the vibe?
Exactly.
Just get with the vibe.
The Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, my message to the Leader of the Conservatives is to be a little more economically literate. I guess he didn't.
That is funny coming from her.
Look at the recent GDP revisions, the upward revisions in GDP that show a good result for Canada in per capita GDP. They also show that Canada has not had a recession, contrary to the predictions of many when we saw the COVID recession. We have had a soft landing. That's something to celebrate.
The Honourable Mr. Speaker, allow me to remind you that the Bloc Québécois' useless measures, apparently, when it came to supply management and seniors, well, the young man who leads the Conservative Party, he voted in favour of those. However, when it comes to purchasing power in Quebec and Canada, there are measures that have been proposed, and there are measures that are going to be accessible to millionaires, and checks are going to be sent to people who, have high revenue, $150,000. Does the government not realize that it's abandoning those who really need help with these measures? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I take the Bloc Québécois' concerns very seriously when it comes to our seniors, and I take them seriously because our government shares those concerns. That is why our government has supported seniors across Canada more than any other federal government. This year, Canadian seniors will get $48 billion in support from the federal government. And that's fair because they deserve it. The Honourable Member for Bellard-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the calculation that you have to make is the one that people are making at home. Those who are between 65 and 74 years old in particular, whose purchasing power has not gotten any better for years now, and who are subject to discrimination and who don't have access to the vote-buying checks coming from the Liberal government. But listen, I don't understand how the Liberals supported the NDP to support them on this. I'd like to know how. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to start by clarifying one detail. And that's that I know that there are many seniors who are still working, and those who work will get the checks.
But if you're not working, you don't get the check.
That we all understand that seniors who are 75 years old and older are more vulnerable. They need more assistance, and that is why our government knows that we need to give them more support.
You know what's cruel? The $250 check that's going out in spring, this Liberal government is excluding seniors, people living with disabilities.
Yeah, that is pretty messed up.
Just started working. What a slap in the face. Why is this Liberal government excluding the most vulnerable in our country?
For the honourable.
Yeah, imagine using the excuse that seniors are still working.
Take the floor.
Dude, old people shouldn't be working.
Everyone.
What the hell's wrong with these liberals?
The honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the NDP leader for his question, and I hope he and all members of this House will help work with us to unblock this Parliament and to get the support to Canadians that they need and deserve. When it comes to the Working Canadians rebate, we know that there are hardworking people across the country who have been through challenging times, and we know that now is the time to provide them with that extra support. I hope all MPs will join us in doing that.
Workers desperately need help, like seniors, persons with disabilities, and young people who've just got their first job. And yet this government is excluding them from the $250 payment. This is a slap in the face. Can the Liberals explain to the most vulnerable Canadians why they're not supporting them?
I mean, this is a phenomenal way for Pierre to try and get Jagmeet to call a vote in non-confidence.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to thank the Leader of the NDP for his question. And I hope that he and all members of this House will help us sincerely help Canadians. Our government understands the importance of supporting the most vulnerable, and that's what we've done starting in 2015, and we will continue to do that. Today, we understand that Canada's workers need help, and we are going to help them.
Everyone who receives a $250 check should go buy a Conservative membership.
The NDP leader is giving Canadians whiplash with his latest flip-flop and the flop on the flip. First, he said he tore up his deal with the Liberal government. Then he said that he had taped it back together because they had signed on to his 2-month tax trick. Now he rises on his feet to say that the trick is a ripoff of seniors and persons with disabilities. So then why won't he put his actions where his words are and vote for a carbon tax election so Canadians can choose between this 2-month trick and axing the tax for good?
It will be of no surprise I'm going to ask the honourable member from New Westminster Burnaby, please, not to take the floor unless recognized by the Speaker.
Isn't that Jagmeet? Is he trying to fight Pierre again?
Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the only inconstant flip-flopper in this House is the Leader of the official opposition. For months, he has been talking about how Canadians need a little more support. But it turns out that unless you recite robotically his Dr. Seuss rhymes, he's not going to agree with your approach to helping Canadians. Now is the chance for him and his MPs to actually give Canadians some real support. Let's get together.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
The streets of a major Canadian city were set on fire this weekend, and the Prime Minister was nowhere to be found. A radical, anti-Semitic, anti-Canadian mob burned cars, smashed windows, assaulted police officers, and the Prime Minister was nowhere to be found. It took him until noon the next day, and he offered the most basic platitudes resembling some standard condemnation that he's been offering after fomenting the hatred that he's now surprised about. So I have one question. When was the Prime Minister told about the riot, and why did he decide to keep dancing the night away?
Wow.
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague, the Minister of Defence, I think properly explained the outrage that all Canadians felt at this wanton, reckless violence on the streets of Montreal. Mr. Speaker, we condemn unequivocally the rising and concerning rates of anti-Semitism and all other hate crimes in the country. We're working with provincial authorities, local police to combat this. And let me be very clear, Mr. Speaker, no matter what group you claim to represent or what cause you're advancing. If you're smashing windows and assaulting Canadians, you're a criminal and you'll face the full consequences of the law.
Calgary. I'm going to ask the member for...
It should mean something, but
it doesn't. The floor unless recognized by the chair.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. The pictures from the riots in Montreal have gone around the world, and it's shameful. We are reaping what the Prime Minister has sowed with his woke, divisive policies. He divided people by race, gender, religion, region, age, wealth, and so on and so forth. And as a result, we've lost control of our borders. We've let criminals come into Canada. Chaos has come in with them. Why is the Prime Minister dancing while Montreal burns?
That's the question.
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I'll say again in French what I've just said in English. Our government, in every instance, condemns the acts of violence and the criminal acts that we saw on the streets of Montreal. It's completely unacceptable to put forward a political point of view by destroying Canadians' property, by committing assault, by attacking police officers. You're not demonstrating peacefully. In those cases, you are a criminal and you'll face justice. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. And yet, Mr. Speaker, for this Prime Minister, it's not enough that Hamas representatives are burning our city senators. He's opened our borders to terrorists and criminals, and he's called anyone who's questioned his policies a racist. Despite the Conservatives' demands to put the Islamic Revolutionary Guard on the list of terrorist entities, he's let them operate legally here for years, and now he's letting Hamas representatives destroy our cities. Why did the Prime Minister choose to dance when he knew that Montreal was burning?
Everyone would love to know that.
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, the RCMP is continuing to work in close cooperation with the good work that was done by the police service in Montreal. At all times, the RCMP supports its partners, whether that be in Montreal or in other regions of the country. We have criticized, and we will continue to criticize, the increase of anti-Semitic acts and hate speech acts in Canada, and we will remain focused on the support that we can give the forces of law and order, something that the Conservatives can't say.
The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, for years, these Liberals have engaged in woke virtue signaling. They have promoted a hollow and superficial understanding of morality, more concerned with appearances than doing what's right. And Canadians clearly saw the consequences of Liberal ideology over the weekend in Montreal when hate-fueled attacks overtook the cities. The Prime Minister is partying while Canadian cities are suffering. So I ask, why was the Prime Minister dancing while Montreal was burning?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for that question, because all Canadians in this House and all Canadians around the country detest and render unacceptable what we saw on the streets of Montreal. That kind of violence, that kind of unlawful behaviour, that kind of anti-Semitism is unacceptable and will never be countenanced. While we're talking about the fight against anti-Semitism, I will just put it to that member that we have legislation on the floor of this chamber that will take the ban on willful promotion of anti-Semitism and accentuate the penalties, taking them from 2 to 5 years. Will the member support that bill? It's called Bill C-63. It targets online radicalization, which is the root cause of what we're seeing.
Bro, shut the hell up. You let people, repeat criminals, out in the streets.
The Honourable Member for Durham.
This Liberal Justice Minister, just like his boss, the Prime Minister, refuses to take any responsibility for creating the conditions that led to what we saw in Montreal just a couple of days ago. It's this Liberal Justice Minister's DEI criminal justice policies that have allowed crime to go unchecked in our cities.
Yeah.
It's this Liberal Justice Minister that won't lift a finger to do anything about the violence targeting religious communities in Canada. The Prime Minister is the problem. The Liberal Justice Minister is the problem. So I ask again, when will the Prime Minister stop dancing and address crime in our cities?
Pretty simple question.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I reject that out of hand. What I would say on this side of the House is that what we are doing is we are working to ease tensions in our communities. We are looking at the statistics on hate crimes. We're seeking to address them. What is the proof positive? When I announced the Bill C-63 in this chamber, who was standing by my side, Mr. Speaker? The people that were standing by my side included the Center for Jewish and Israeli Affairs. Why? Because they know you don't get a Pittsburgh Tree of Life synagogue attack unless you're radicalized online. Radicalization online is causing anti-Semitism. It is what we will combat through this bill, through every measure on this side of the House.
So the Montreal mayor actually says that the weekend protests were not anti-Semitic. Get a load of that, huh?